My property sits at the end of a winding gravel road, far enough from town to feel like an escape, but close enough for convenience when needed. The entrance is marked by a handcrafted wooden gate that my grandfather helped me build 5 years ago. It is not just a barrier, it is a statement, a piece of artistry crafted from local pine, carved with images of the surrounding forest and mountains. It represents everything I came here for: peace, independence, and distance from the suffocating rules of suburban living. I had saved for 10 years to afford these 5 acres. After growing up in a cramped apartment complex where the landlord dictated everything from paint colors to pet ownership, I craved space and the freedom to build my life according to my own vision. The neighboring properties were similar: modest homes with generous land, owned by people who valued privacy and self-sufficiency. We formed a loose community of independent spirits, helping when needed but respecting boundaries. Everything changed 8 months ago when Pinecrest Development Corporation purchased the large tract of land half a mile down the road. They built 80 luxury homes in record time, complete with a homeowners association that managed every aspect of their pristine community. What we did not know was that through some legal maneuver involving county rezoning, their HOA territory had been expanded to include our previously independent properties. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, printed on expensive cardstock with the Pinecrest HOA logo embossed at the top. It outlined new community standards and included a bill for $350 in annual dues. I called my neighbors immediately. Everyone had received the same letter. We tried to protest, but the county commissioners cited obscure bylaws and development agreements that apparently gave Pinecrest authority to absorb our area. The initial conflicts were small but infuriating. My vegetable garden was deemed unsightly agricultural activity. The shed where I store firewood was not architecturally harmonious with community standards. Each complaint came with a fine and a deadline for correction. Each deadline came with the promise of escalating penalties. The face of this new oppressive regime was Marjorie Keene, head of the HOA Patrol Committee. She drove a white SUV with the Pinecrest logo on the door, her platinum blonde hair always perfectly coiffed, her clipboard ever present. While the other HOA representatives were merely following rules, Marjorie seemed to take personal pleasure in finding violations. "Those wind chimes are not on the approved decoration list," she informed me on her third visit, writing furiously on her citation pad. "And your mailbox is 7 inches taller than regulation height." "This mailbox has been here for 5 years," I responded, feeling my blood pressure rise. "And the wind chimes were a gift from my late grandmother." Marjorie smiled thinly. "Rules are rules. You have 7 days to comply or face a $75 fine per item." These confrontations continued for months. Each time I fixed one violation, Marjorie found another. It was as if she had made it her mission to break my spirit or drive me away. Last week, I received notice that I needed to attend a business conference in Chicago, 3 days, non-negotiable. As I packed my suitcase the night before leaving, I glanced nervously out the window toward my gate. Something told me that Marjorie had been waiting for an opportunity like this. With no one home to challenge her, what would she do? I called my nearest neighbor, Jack, and asked him to keep an eye on my place. "Do not worry," Jack assured me. "I will walk by twice a day. If that HOA vulture shows up, I will let you know immediately." With that small comfort, I locked up my house and drove away at dawn, unaware that I was leaving my sanctuary vulnerable to an attack that would change everything. I was halfway through my presentation when my phone began vibrating repeatedly in my pocket. Trying to maintain my professionalism, I ignored it until the conference room broke for a 15-minute recess. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, I pulled out my phone to find 17 missed calls and text messages. Jack had sent multiple photos showing Marjorie and two men in Pinecrest HOA uniforms standing in front of my gate. The text below read, "They are measuring your gate and taking pictures. Something about non-compliance." My heart rate quickened as I scrolled through more messages from other neighbors. The situation was escalating rapidly. The most recent text from Jack sent my stomach plummeting to the floor. "They brought barriers, metal and concrete. They are blocking your gate, saying no one can enter until violation is fixed." I immediately called Jack, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. "What exactly are they claiming is the violation?" I asked, packing the hallway as conference attendees streamed past me. "Something about the gate height exceeding regulation by 4 inches and unauthorized decorative elements," Jack explained. "But that is not the worst part. They have placed concrete barriers across your driveway entrance. No one can get in or out. They posted some kind of official-looking notice saying any attempt to remove the barriers will result in trespassing charges and property liens." I could not believe what I was hearing. "They cannot do that. That is my private property." "They are claiming authority under section whatever of the HOA agreement we never signed," Jack said, his voice tight with anger. I tried to reason with them, but that Marjorie woman just kept pointing to her clipboard and saying it was all perfectly legal. My mind raced to what was inside my now inaccessible home. I had medication that needed refrigeration. My dog was at a neighbor's for the duration of my trip, but what if there was an emergency and I needed to return home immediately? "Did you call the sheriff?" I asked. "They said it is a civil matter between you and the HOA," Jack replied. "They will not get involved unless there is a breach of peace." I hung up and immediately called the Pinecrest HOA office. After navigating an infuriating automated menu, I finally reached a human being. "This is Patricia from Pinecrest HOA. How may I assist you today?" The voice was professionally detached, almost bored. "Your patrol has blocked access to my property with barriers," I explained, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I am out of town on business, and they have essentially locked me out of my own home. You need to remove those barriers immediately." "Let me check the system," Patricia responded, keyboard clicking in the background. "Yes, I see the violation report filed by Mrs. Keene this morning. Your property entrance does not comply with Regulation 17B of the Community Standards. The barriers are standard procedure for significant violations when the homeowner is not present to sign the citation." "But I never agreed to be part of your HOA," I protested, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "And you cannot block access to my property. It is illegal." "Sir, when your area was incorporated into Pinecrest jurisdiction, all properties became subject to our governance," Patricia recited, as if reading from a script. "The barriers will remain until you agree to bring your gate into compliance. You can schedule a hearing with the board upon your return, but modifications must be completed before the barriers can be removed." No matter what argument I presented, the answer remained unchanged. I called 3 different lawyers, only to hear that while I might eventually win in court, any legal process would take weeks or months. I needed a solution now. As the conference organizers signaled the end of our break, I realized with growing panic that I was trapped in Chicago while my home was under siege. The next flight home was not until tomorrow evening. By then, who knew what additional enforcement actions Marjorie might take? There was only one person I could think of who would know how to handle this situation, someone who understood both the land and the stubborn nature of people who try to control it. With shaking hands, I dialed a number I rarely used but knew by heart. "Grandpa, I need your help. It is about my property." As the line connected and his gruff voice answered, I felt the first glimmer of hope since this nightmare began. My grandfather lives in a small cabin just 20 minutes from my property. At 74 years old, Franklin Miller remains as sturdy as the oak trees he once harvested. Before retirement, he had been a logger for over 40 years, working his way up from cutting timber to owning a small logging operation that employed half the men in our county. His weathered hands tell the story of decades spent battling nature and machinery, while his eyes still hold the sharp clarity of a man who has faced danger and survived. When I called him that afternoon, the sounds of a baseball game hummed in the background. His landline was the only phone he would use. He distrusted cell phones and computers with equal measure. "What kind of trouble are you in?" he asked after I explained the situation. His voice was calm, almost too calm. I had heard that tone before, usually right before a storm broke. "They have blocked my gate with concrete barriers," I repeated. "The HOA says they will not remove them until I agree to modify my gate to meet their standards. I am stuck in Chicago until tomorrow night." "The gate we built together," Grandpa clarified, and I could hear the edge creeping into his voice. "Yes, they say it is 4 inches too tall, and the carvings are not approved decorative elements." A long silence followed, broken only by the muffled sounds of the baseball announcer. When Grandpa finally spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave. "I will handle it. Do not worry about your conference. Focus on your work." "Grandpa, do not do anything that will get you in trouble," I urged, suddenly concerned about what handling it might mean to a man who had spent his life solving problems with chainsaws and heavy machinery. "I am just going to have a conversation," he assured me, though the promise rang hollow. "Call you tonight." 3 hours later, as I was wrapping up the day's final session, a video message arrived from Jack. I slipped out early to watch it in private. The video showed my grandfather standing at my blocked gate, facing off with Marjorie Keene. Grandpa wore his typical outfit, faded flannel shirt, work jeans worn soft at the knees, and boots that had trudged through countless forests. Next to Marjorie's crisp blazer and pressed slacks, he looked like a visitor from another world. "Ma'am, I understand there is some confusion about this property," Grandpa was saying, his tone respectful but firm. "My grandchild built this gate to honor our family heritage. It has stood here for 5 years without causing any problems." Marjorie barely glanced up from her clipboard. "Sir, the regulations are quite clear. Section 17B states that all entrance features must conform to the aesthetic guidelines established by the board. This gate exceeds height limitations and contains unauthorized artistic elements." "This gate was here long before your development," Grandpa pointed out, "and it is on private property that has been in our family for generations." Marjorie sighed with exaggerated patience. "Perhaps you do not understand how HOAs work. Your area has been incorporated into our jurisdiction through proper legal channels. These barriers will remain until the homeowner agrees to bring the property into compliance." I watched as my grandfather straightened his back, seeming to grow taller. At 6'3", he towered over Marjorie, though she appeared completely unfazed. "I understand perfectly how things work around here," Grandpa replied, his voice taking on the quiet authority that had commanded respect from hardened loggers for decades. "I helped build this community when your HOA was nothing but forest and dreams. Now I am asking you nicely to remove these barriers from my grandchild's property." Marjorie actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound that made my blood boil even through the video. With all due respect, sir, your history in the area grants you no special privileges. If you continue to interfere with HOA business, I will be forced to call security. The camera shook slightly as Jack zoomed in on my grandfather's face. Most people would have missed it, but I could see the subtle shift in his expression, a tightening around the eyes, a slight clench of his jaw. Anyone who knew Franklin Miller recognized these as warning signs. I see, Grandpa said simply, turning to leave. The barriers stay until proper modifications are made. Marjorie called after him, her voice triumphant. The video ended, but another text from Jack quickly followed. Your grandfather just left, but he was making calls on his old flip phone. Said something about getting the boys together and the big truck. Should I be worried? I stared at my phone, a mixture of dread and anticipation building in my chest. Then another message appeared, this time from my neighbor Elaine, whose property bordered mine. Your grandfather just stopped by. Asked if I still had Jim Patterson's number from the old logging days. Said something about special equipment being needed. That evening my phone rang, Grandpa's number. Everything okay? I asked cautiously. Not yet, he replied, but it will be. I called some old friends. This situation calls for the big equipment. Grandpa, what exactly are you planning? Nothing illegal, he assured me, though his chuckle held little humor. Just going to have a community meeting at your gate tomorrow morning. Sleep well. Your property will be accessible when you get home. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone with equal parts worry and wild hope. Word travels fast in small communities, especially when old networks are activated. By 9 the next morning, while I sat anxiously through conference presentations, checking my phone every few minutes, a remarkable scene was unfolding back home. The videos and photos flooding in from neighbors told an astonishing story. My grandfather had spent the evening calling every member of his former logging crew, men who had worked alongside him for decades, felling trees and hauling timber across the most challenging terrain in the county. Now in their 60s and 70s, most were retired, but they had kept their connections, and more importantly, some had kept their equipment. Jim Patterson had been my grandfather's right-hand man for 30 years. He still owned the massive logging truck they had used in the final decade of operation, a behemoth capable of hauling loads that would crush ordinary vehicles. The photos showed Jim performing maintenance checks on the truck, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision across the engine. Meanwhile, other members of the old crew were gathering at my grandfather's cabin. There was Ray Wilson, who had operated the heaviest machinery, Mike Santiago, whose skill with chains and cables was legendary, and at least 8 other men I recognized from childhood visits to logging sites. These were not men who sought conflict, but neither were they strangers to standing their ground when necessary. The old-timers are waking up the neighborhood, texted my neighbor Elaine. Your grandfather has at least 15 former loggers at his place. They are checking equipment and loading chains onto trucks. It looks like they are preparing for something big. My phone buzzed with another update, this time from Jack. His message included a photo of several neighbors gathered at the end of my driveway, just beyond the barriers. Men and women of all ages stood talking in small groups, some holding coffee cups, others with arms crossed in what appeared to be solidarity. People keep showing up, Jack wrote. Word spread that the HOA blocked someone's property, and it has touched a nerve. The Richardson family from down the road came by with donuts. Said the HOA tried to find them for their daughter's basketball hoop last month. As the morning progressed, more community members arrived. Mrs. Abernathy, the retired schoolteacher who had taught 3 generations of local children, brought a folding chair and situated herself near my blocked gate with a thermos and a book, as if settling in for a long wait. The Johnsons, who ran the local hardware store, arrived with a cooler of drinks. Even Pastor Mike from the community church made an appearance, chatting quietly with gathered neighbors. "Your grandfather is building an army," Jack texted, attaching another photo showing at least 30 people now gathered near my property. People are sharing HOA horror stories. Did you know the Wilsons almost lost their house because their mailbox was painted the wrong shade of brown? Everyone here has a grievance. Around 11, Sheriff Thompson's patrol car pulled up. The crowd tensed visibly in the video Elaine sent, but the sheriff merely stepped out, surveyed the scene, and approached my grandfather. Their conversation was brief, captured in snippets by various neighbors recording the interaction. "Got reports of a potential disturbance," Sheriff Thompson said, though his tone lacked urgency. "Just a community gathering, Dan," my grandfather replied easily. They had known each other for decades. The sheriff had even worked summers on my grandfather's logging crew during high school. "Might get a bit noisy later, but nothing illegal planned." The sheriff nodded slowly, glancing at the concrete barriers. "Those look like they are blocking access to private property." "That is exactly the problem we are hoping to resolve," my grandfather confirmed. Sheriff Thompson checked his watch. "Well, I have some paperwork that needs attending back at the station. Might take me a couple hours. You folks stay civil, you hear." As the sheriff drove away, I received another message from Jack. "Sheriff just left. Said loud enough for everyone to hear that he will be unavailable for the next 2 hours due to administrative duties. Winked at your grandfather." Meanwhile, the HOA had not remained idle. Around noon, Marjorie returned with reinforcements. The HOA president himself, Arnold Pembroke, and 2 other board members in a luxury SUV. Their arrival was captured by multiple cameras as neighbors documented every development. Marjorie approached the gathered crowd with visible disdain. "This assembly is not authorized by the Pinecrest Homeowners Association. You are all trespassing on HOA jurisdiction." The response was immediate and unified laughter, not mocking, but genuinely amused at the claim that these people were trespassing in their own community. Marjorie retreated to confer with Arnold, whose expression grew increasingly concerned as he surveyed the growing crowd. "Something big is happening," texted Elaine. "Your grandfather just got a call. He is smiling for the first time today. He told everyone to get ready for the show." The final video I received before my phone battery died showed a distant rumbling sound. The camera panned to the end of the road, where dust was rising. Whatever my grandfather had planned was now in motion, and I could only hope it would not end in disaster. I landed at the regional airport at 4:30 p.m., still hours from home but desperate for updates. As soon as I connected to airport Wi-Fi, my phone erupted with notifications, texts, videos, and voicemails describing what many neighbors were already calling the stand at Miller Gate. I found a quiet corner in the terminal and pieced together the afternoon's events through the flood of media. What I saw left me breathless. The first video showed the arrival of what one neighbor had aptly called the cavalry. The ground literally trembled as the massive logging truck appeared at the end of the road, its engine roaring with decades of power and purpose. Behind the wheel sat Jim Patterson, his white beard visible even from a distance. My grandfather rode shotgun, his expression set in granite determination. Behind them came a procession of pickup trucks carrying the rest of the old logging crew. each vehicle loaded with equipment that had once tamed the wildest forests in the region. The gathered crowd parted respectfully as the trucks approached my blocked gate. The HOA contingent, now reinforced by their attorney, a thin man in an expensive suit clutching a leather portfolio, stood their ground, though video clearly captured their uncertain glances at the approaching machinery. Jim maneuvered the enormous logging truck with surprising grace, positioning it directly in front of my gate but leaving enough space for confrontation. The engine idled with a low, persistent growl that seemed to vibrate the very air. My grandfather descended from the cab with the measured movements of a man who had spent his life in calculated motions around dangerous equipment. Arnold Pembroke, the HOA president, stepped forward with his hand extended in what appeared to be a peacemaking gesture. The crowd fell silent, straining to hear the exchange. "Mr. Miller, I understand your frustration, but this display of force is entirely inappropriate," Arnold began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of a career in corporate management. "We can discuss your concerns through proper channels." My grandfather did not take the offered hand. "There is nothing to discuss. Those barriers are illegally blocking access to private property. They need to be removed immediately." Marjorie pushed forward, clipboard at the ready like a shield. "The property is in violation of clear HOA standards that everyone in this community is required to follow." "My granddaughter never agreed to be part of your HOA," my grandfather replied, his voice remaining steady. "That gate was built before your development existed." The HOA attorney stepped forward, opening his portfolio. "Actually, sir, the county rezoning initiative of last year specifically incorporated this area into Pinecrest jurisdiction. Section 5, Paragraph 3 of the ordinance clearly states—" "I do not care what your papers say," my grandfather interrupted. "That gate stays as it is. Those barriers go, today." Arnold's expression hardened. "Mr. Miller, I appreciate that you have gathered your friends here for moral support, but if you attempt to remove those barriers, we will be forced to take legal action. We could place liens on the property, pursue damages, even force foreclosure for non-compliance." The crowd murmured angrily at this threat, but fell silent as my grandfather simply turned and nodded to Jim and the crew. What happened next unfolded with the practiced precision of men who had worked together for decades. The logging crew began unloading equipment from their trucks: heavy chains, industrial-grade cable cutters, massive hooks, and hydraulic winches capable of pulling multi-ton logs up mountainsides. Each man moved with purpose, the choreography of their actions speaking to years of coordinated labor in far more dangerous situations than this. Neighbors captured every moment on their phones. The crowd had grown even larger, with some estimates putting the number at over 70 people. Mrs. Abernathy had organized them into a documentation team, ensuring that multiple angles of every development were recorded. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" demanded Marjorie, her voice rising an octave as Mike Santiago approached the barriers with measuring tools. "Assessing the structural integrity of these obstacles," Mike replied calmly, "determining the most efficient removal method." The HOA attorney stepped forward again. "This is destruction of property. We will call the sheriff immediately." "Go ahead," called out Jack from the crowd, "though I heard he is tied up with important paperwork for another hour at least." My grandfather approached Arnold once more, close enough that their conversation would not be heard by most of the crowd, though several neighbors had moved their recording phones within range. "Let me explain something to you," my grandfather said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. That truck over there once pulled a 150-year-old redwood up a 40-degree slope in the rain. Those chains have held weights that would crush your SUV flat as paper. Those men have faced dangers you cannot imagine and walked away to tell about it. He pointed to the barriers. Those concrete blocks mean nothing to us. We can remove them in under 5 minutes, with or without damage to your precious HOA property. But I am giving you one last chance to do the right thing and move them yourselves. Arnold swallowed visibly, looking from my grandfather to the logging truck, to the increasingly hostile crowd, and back to his small group of HOA representatives. We have legal authority here, he insisted, though his voice had lost its confident edge. My grandfather smiled for the first time, not a warm smile, but the kind that wolves might give before a hunt. And we have a logging truck. He turned back to the crew and raised his hand, a signal that everyone understood. Jim started up the truck again, its engine roaring to life with renewed purpose. Mike and Ray began attaching the heavy chains to the front hook of the vehicle. "Wait," Arnold shouted, his face flushed. "This is completely unnecessary. You cannot just—" "You have 15 minutes to remove those barriers," my grandfather announced, his voice cutting through the noise of the engine. "After that, we do it our way, and I cannot guarantee what might be attached to them when we pull." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as my grandfather walked back to stand beside the truck, arms crossed, the very picture of immovable resolve. The 15-minute ultimatum created a flurry of activity within the HOA leadership. Arnold huddled with the attorney and other board members, their gestures growing increasingly agitated as they consulted documents and made phone calls. Marjorie paced back and forth, her perfectly styled hair beginning to wilt in the afternoon sun, her clipboard now clutched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Meanwhile, my grandfather's crew continued their preparations with methodical efficiency. Mike and Ray secured massive chains to strategic points near the barriers, the metal links thick as a man's wrist clanking ominously as they worked. Jim made final adjustments to the logging truck's hydraulic system, the machinery hissing and groaning like a living thing preparing to flex its strength. The crowd of neighbors had now organized themselves into an impromptu documentation team and support group. Some distributed water and snacks, others positioned themselves strategically with phones and cameras to capture every angle of the unfolding confrontation. The atmosphere had taken on an almost festival-like quality, a community united against perceived injustice. 10 minutes into the ultimatum, a new vehicle arrived, a van from the local news station, complete with a reporter and cameraman. Mrs. Abernathy had apparently taken it upon herself to contact the media. "This is Jennifer Martinez from Channel 7 News," the reporter announced, microphone in hand, as the cameraman began filming. "We are here following reports of a standoff between local residents and the Pinecrest Homeowners Association. Can someone explain what is happening here?" Before the HOA representatives could respond, my grandfather stepped forward. His natural dignity and straightforward manner made him an instant camera magnet. "The situation is simple," he explained, his voice clear and unhurried. "My granddaughter built this gate 5 years ago, before this area was pulled into an HOA without proper consultation. Now they have blocked access to her private property with concrete barriers because the gate is supposedly 4 inches too tall. We have asked them to remove the barriers. They have refused. We are prepared to remove them ourselves." The camera panned to the logging truck and the chains, then back to my grandfather's weathered face. "And how exactly do you plan to remove them?" the reporter asked. With perfect timing, Jim revved the logging truck's engine, sending a thunderous roar across the gathering. My grandfather did not need to answer. The message was clear. The reporter turned toward the HOA group. Do you have a response to these allegations? Arnold stepped forward, attempting to regain control of the narrative. This is a simple matter of community standards being enforced. Every resident agreed to these rules when. That is not true, called out several voices from the crowd, and the camera swung toward them. We never agreed to anything, explained Mrs. Abernathy, her teacher's voice carrying easily. Our homes were incorporated into their HOA through backroom deals with county commissioners. Many of us have lived here for decades. The cameraman captured the nodding heads and sounds of agreement from the crowd before returning to Arnold, who was now visibly sweating through his polo shirt. The reporter pressed further. Is it standard HOA procedure to physically block access to someone's home over a minor violation? As Arnold stumbled through a response about escalating enforcement protocols, my grandfather stepped closer to the barriers, checking his watch pointedly. 3 minutes remaining, he announced. The HOA attorney frantically made another call, packing in tight circles. Marjorie appeared to be on the verge of tears, her clipboard now hanging limply at her side. Arnold conferred desperately with the other board members. With just under 2 minutes left in the ultimatum, Jim started the logging truck's engine once more and engaged the hydraulic system for the winch. The chains tightened with a metallic groan, taking up slack until they were taut against the concrete barriers. Wait, Arnold shouted, raising both hands. We need to discuss this reasonably. 2 years of unreasonable rules, 2 days of illegal blockade. You have had plenty of time for discussion, my grandfather replied, unmoved. 1 minute remaining. The reporter and cameraman captured everything, the tension palpable even through the small screen of my phone as I watched from the airport. With 30 seconds left, Arnold broke. Fine, we will remove the barriers. Just stop this insanity. My grandfather raised his hand, and Jim shut down the hydraulic system, though the truck remained running. Right now, my grandfather clarified. Not tomorrow, not after another meeting, now. Arnold nodded frantically, gesturing to the 2 HOA maintenance workers who had remained quietly by their vehicle throughout the confrontation. They hurried forward with tools to begin dismantling the blockade. The crowd cheered as the first barrier was pulled aside. The news camera captured everything. The reluctant HOA workers, the triumphant community members, and my grandfather standing tall beside the logging truck, the embodiment of unwavering principle. When the path to my gate stood completely clear once more, my grandfather approached Arnold one final time. Consider this a community lesson, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some things matter more than rules written on paper. Remember that before you block someone's access to their home again. The neighbors erupted in applause, and the news reporter stepped forward for a closing statement as the HOA representatives retreated to their vehicles, defeated not just by force, but by the court of public opinion. I arrived home just after sunset, my rental car tires crunching on the gravel driveway. The scene that greeted me took my breath away. My gate stood proudly open, illuminated by strings of lights that neighbors had hung along the fence line. Beyond it, at least 30 people milled about on my property, the smoke from a barbecue grill rising into the twilight sky. Several pickup trucks were parked in the yard, including the massive logging truck that had turned the tide of battle. As I stepped from my car, tired from travel but energized by the sight, a cheer went up from the gathered crowd. My grandfather emerged from the group, a rare smile lighting his weathered face. "Welcome home," he said simply, embracing me briefly but firmly. Hope you do not mind the company. Seemed like a celebration was in order. Jack approached with a plate of food and a cold drink. Your grandfather invited the whole neighborhood. We have been taking turns watching the footage from the standoff. Channel 7 ran it as their top story on the evening news. The impromptu party continued well into the night. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged occasional waves now talked animatedly, sharing stories of HOA overreach and celebrating their collective stand. The logging crew, these giants from my childhood memories, sat together near the fire pit, occasionally chuckling at some shared recollection from their working days. "Did you see Marjorie's face when Jim revved that engine?" Ray asked, setting off another round of laughter. "I thought she was going to faint right there on the spot." As the celebration wound down and people began to head home, my grandfather pulled me aside. "There is something you should know. While you were in the air, some interesting developments happened." He explained that following the confrontation, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting. The footage from the news, combined with the dozens of videos uploaded to social media by neighbors, had created a public relations nightmare for Pinecrest development. "By tomorrow morning, you will have an official letter apologizing for the misunderstanding and exempting your property from certain architectural guidelines," my grandfather explained. "Arnold called me personally to arrange it." "What about Marjorie?" I asked, thinking of her vindictive enforcement. My grandfather's eyes crinkled with satisfaction. "Let us just say she has been reassigned to administrative duties. No more field enforcement for her." 3 days later, we received confirmation that the HOA had indeed revised its policies. Properties that existed before the development would be grandfathered in, with special exemptions for pre-existing structures. Additionally, the board had established a resident advisory committee to review all enforcement actions before implementation. More importantly, the community had awakened to its own power. The week after the stand at Miller Gate, as it was now universally known, the first meeting of the Pinecrest Neighborhood Alliance took place at the community center. Over 60 residents attended, establishing guidelines for challenging unfair HOA practices and creating a support network for those facing enforcement issues. 2 weeks after the confrontation, on a quiet Saturday morning, my grandfather arrived carrying something wrapped in an old canvas tarp. "Got you something for that gate," he said, unveiling a hand-carved wooden sign. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the letters burned deep into aged oak, "Protected by community."